In this video, we'll be looking at different ways to write the equation of a sinusoid. The problem that we'll be working with is write the equation of the sinusoid shown below in four ways, both as a sine curve and as a cosine curve. Alright, so let's look at it as a sine curve first. A sine curve starts its period at the axis and then heads up, hits the axis again, heads down, and finishes the period. So as a sine curve, this sinusoid is shifted left 60 degrees because it normally ends at 360 and this point is 300. So for our sine equation, we could write y equals, and I'm going to scoot this over a little bit because we have some other numbers that need to be put in there. But remember, if it's a negative 60 phase angle, that means that we have x plus 60 here in this spot. And that's assuming x is my horizontal axis. Could be theta. Now the coefficient of my sine here, the number that's multiplied, is the amplitude. And that is the distance from the center line up to the maximum. Well, we don't have any label on our center line, but we can find it if our maximum is at 6 and our minimum is at 2. That total is 4 units. So half of that is going to be above the center line and half below. Since the total was 4, that means my amplitude is 2. And then we can put my, if that's plus there, we can put my center line 2 units down from 6. It'll be at 4. So my center line is moved up 4 units. Now I can also write it as a sine curve with a negative coefficient here. My center line will still be at 4, but I want a negative sine curve, which means that this would be my starting point because it would head down instead of heading up. So this is a positive 120 degree phase angle, which means that back here I'll have x minus 120 degrees. And remember, we said this would be a negative sine curve, so I've got a negative 2 sine here. Now if we looked at this as a cosine curve, remember cosine curve starts at the maximum and heads down and then ends the period at the maximum. So this one starts at 30 degrees and then ends the period at 390. So that would be a positive cosine curve. My center line is still at 4. My amplitude is still 2, and let's go ahead and talk about the positive cosine curve. So 2 cosine. And my phase angle, I have a positive 30 degree phase angle, which means this is x minus 30. Now if I want to write this as a negative cosine curve, that means I would need to start at this point, or if we had more of it shown, I could start back in here. Usually you try to go with the one closest to the origin, but since this one's shown, I'm going to use the 210. This is positive 210 phase angle, and it's a negative cosine curve. So I have same center line, but negative 2 cosine, and then this will be x minus 210. Now if we notice in between hitting the axis and our minimum point, that is 90 degrees. So this would hit its minimum point at negative 150. So if I wanted to use that, I could also say y equals 4 minus 2 cosine. And then since the angle was a negative 150, I could have x